Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Ross Garner. Coach Garner is the head strength conditioning coach at Effingham High School. Prior to that, he was at Cleburne High School. Coach Garner is a co-host of Victory Over Self Radio, and as a friend and coach I rely on heavily when I'm working out new ideas. So thanks for coming back on the show, Coach.
Hey, 2.0 here, man. We're in a much different spot compared to where we were last time.
That's what's gotten to be so much fun is I've went along this journey for a while, and now I'm able to get back to guys that are friends or guys that I really rely on heavily for the things I do and get to have a whole new conversation.
Yeah, we've definitely, obviously when we first hopped on, we just kind of got to know each other. And now at this point, I got pages of texts and whatever else, man. It's us and Tucker and obviously other guys, man. It's been really good, obviously learning and getting to know each other. And you've always got great ideas that I steal from my big groups, and then I just go from there.
Well, hopefully they're good ideas. I'm not always so sure, but it's nice to have a text group you can bounce ideas off of, and maybe they've tried it and they can guide that decision in the right direction so there's not so many mistakes.
Well, I know I always bounce ideas. I've got a couple group chats that probably get annoyed by how often I bounce ideas out there and just throw stuff on the table and see what anybody thinks. Because at this point, I don't care who's right or wrong. I just want to know what everybody, they've got different viewpoints and see what's right or wrong and just make an adjustment. I couldn't care less who gets the credit. I just like hearing other people's perspectives, because then all of a sudden, a way that you're looking at it is different than me. And all of a sudden that makes way more sense to me than what I was doing. And so I always enjoyed that.
When I started this thing, it was like my dreams have kind of come true. Really, I don't know how I could have envisioned it any better. You start a podcast, you get to be friends with coaches, you end up in text groups, you end up talking about athletes from all over the country, all over different schools. You get invited to go to places. It was a far off dream when I started this, and it's kind of turned into a reality. And it's because I've met really good coaches like you and Tucker and different guys out there that have been super open with what they do and really open with their facilities.
Well, I think you do it. I think you probably do the best job of anybody in terms of just getting details out of people, and having that discussion. I think you, and I'm very biased, I think Chris Kerr does a great job on his questions and getting those details of getting into the nitty gritty of why somebody does something and, what got them there or what adjustments they need to make, of just off the top questions, and I think on your end, because of how quickly, you've gotten to a point of where your training's at, of, when you started training people and learning and doing stuff and because you've been working with individuals, you get to see stuff so quickly happen and what works and what's improving, that you're so open to ideas that because you didn't have any sort of prior background, right? Like you just got into it and started training, and all your experience was on the fly and practical initially, right? Like obviously you were reading and you've talked about that. But you had so much at the same time of learning and the reading and the practical that not everybody gets that. Like for me, I was interning in strength and conditioning and I was not in a classroom. Like all my stuff was practical. And so you kind of learn of not having this box to be in. Instead, it's what works, what doesn't, and what's realistic. And I think you've just done such a good job of that you have really good questions and perspectives, and you've talked to so many people that I think you draw answers out of people that not everybody does.
I hope so. And I don't know if it's out of my own curiosity or if I'm just belligerent about it, but it works. And I did start very, very roughly, I guess. I had a West Side book, and this is the way we're going to go. I'm only now going back to school to get my degrees because I figured it would be nice to have the paper,
Right.
We've got good athletes, but at the end of the day, everybody kind of wants to see the paper. And if I would ever decide to start like a real facility, I think it would be nice to have a degree on the wall.
Definitely checks a box. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what I got a master's in exercise science, but I didn't exactly learn a ton from that. It was more just checking a box, and it says that you know what you're doing.
and looking back on my life now, I couldn't have done it when I was 18. I don't know that I could have went to college straight out of high school and made it. I would have found a way to flunk out.
Hey, honestly, for me, I'm very glad that I have kind of the route that it's become because, long term for me, it's being an AD, but that's super down the road. But all the background and stuff I've had, it'll all pan out to that perspective. But I think not having the that true, 4 year exercise science background, I think is more favorable than not initially. And then obviously as you go down the road, yeah, you got to learn that science stuff and the background and stuff. But I think just initially you don't get boxed in of thinking, well, this you got to do 8 to 12 reps, and then you got to do 4 to 8 and one to, you know what I mean? Like all that stuff. You just get put in a box, and I think it helps early on.
We'll see. I still got a long ways to go, but
Same, same.
we'll run it and see what happens. So you've got a little closer to home now that you're back into Georgia. It's probably not exactly home, but it's probably closer.
It's a heck of a lot closer.
Yeah, you when we first met, you were in Cleburne, and
Hmm.
you had things kind of rolling there, and then this job opened up. So now you're back on the coast. You've got a
Yep.
nice gig going, a nice weight room that just got built. How much different are the athletes? Are athletes and kids when you go from somewhere around the Fort Worth area to Savannah?
I think, man, when place to place to place, because been in Virginia, Florida, Texas, and now Georgia, which never had a plan to move that much for sure. I know my wife is done moving. I'm done moving, and so we'll be here as long as they'll let us, as long as Coach Ford will let me be here. And I think athlete to athlete, man, it when you're dealing with the high school kid, it has way more to do with kind of where they naturally start, like on that kind of bandwidth, of athleticism is your good high school programs naturally have a lot more guys that have, a little bit higher athleticism and base level of athleticism. Not that you can't improve that because you certainly can. But it's just naturally where they start, and in Effingham here in Georgia, we've got really good athletes and they start at a higher level, like just meaning that, their raw athleticism. I've got generally speaking, a much more athletic group than what we had in Texas. Not that those guys weren't athletic. It's just there's just more. There's just more athletes around, and so that part has been different. But the training, your training's still going to be the same. Instead of the only difference is that okay, instead of the majority of the guys starting at let's say a 5'1" 40 or a 5'2" 40, they're going to start at a 5 flat. They might be around that, and you're working from there. But at the end of the day, training's the same. Athletes are going to be similar. It's just a matter of where that bandwidth is, and and your good programs, and we've got a pretty good program. You're just gonna have more of those athletes around, and if you're not as good, you're not gonna have as many. And it's just really that simple at high school, I think. And because everybody's training in some capacity, but I do think that it makes a massive difference on your training and what you do at high school because it's really just a matter of constant progression, and what's that 4 year progression look like? If there's anything I've definitely, I don't want to say changed my mind on, it's more about, I think you make I think at the high school level, we make such a bigger difference than what I used to think in terms of just athletic development, solely based off of what we've done training wise and where guys have gone and being more, definitely much more aggressive now. And I think it makes such a drastic, it can make such a drastic difference. Obviously, your good guys are going to be your good guys, but man, I think where you make your money is what are those average athletes, those middle of the road athletes, what are they doing? And I think that's where a good high school strength coach makes their money is what's the difference on those guys? Because your good athletes are going to get better, and all that kind of stuff. But where's that? Where's, I got my top 22 on the football team. Where is now the next 22? How are they improving? And I think that's where you make your money now. If there's anything I've kind of changed, I don't want to say changed on. I just believe we make a bigger impact than what people like to admit or take credit for. But that's just me.
I would say that I agree with that. When you get maybe a kid that hasn't been exposed to certain training modalities and you you put them in. I've seen a lot of kids that are really good athletically, and then you add in jumps or something like that really you don't think in your head's that big of a deal, and you watch them struggle and you watch them fail, and it's like, well, how are you this good on the field and you can't jump over a hurdle? You know? So I definitely agree with that. I think you can make a huge splash. The other thing I think is good athletes, we all love them, but they spoil you, and you have to have the right mindset. It's very hard to go from a really high-end athlete to a kid that's struggling. You have to stay locked in and not let the really good ones spoil you.
For sure. And I think all right, so I'll give the perspective of like when I first got here, for example. Our guys are great lifters. Like they did 5-3-1, standard issue 5-3-1, squat, bench, deadlift. Well, they didn't deadlift, sorry, they cleaned. So squat, bench, clean, 5-3-1, same similar cycles over and over again. So our guys, like they had a pretty good base level of strength, and the part that I had to kind of battle when I first got here was that the guys weren't used to doing, like, we'll just call it having the work capacity, and being able to train that. And then also doing something other than back squat. We're going to front squat, we're going to split squat, we're going to box squat, we're going to do all these different squats. They weren't used to that. And so, as you know, as we all know, if all I ever do is back squat, I'm going to get daggone good at that back squat. I'm going to get daggone good at that bench. I'm going to get, if that's the only movement I do. And so, something I kind of dealt with when I first got here was that, guys' maxes went down based off of what was given to me and looking at the paper. Now, when you look at some of them, like, I don't know if Johnny could have done that, but I trust the coaches. It's just, I'm just like, I don't know. And so you kind of dealt with that. Well, I could back squat 500 previously, and now I'm at 365. I'm just like, well, either your work capacity is terrible or you just haven't back squatted in a long time. I don't know what to tell you. And so that, you're kind of battling that when you first got here. But, now the guys, after that first, 2-month kind of adjustment, they've blown past those numbers and they're doing just fine. But there was definitely that initial kind of work capacity adjustment. And to the point here is that the guys in the middle is where we're just seeing the massive difference, and guys that, on paper or on the field maybe weren't star guys, but now all of a sudden, like I've got some kind of, we'll call them like our middle of the road linemen. I mean, you got 50 pounds on your bench, you got 70 pounds on your dead, and this is after 6 months. Like we're doing really good. And that's where, man, I can't wait to see these guys when they come out of this in the spring and the new facility and stuff, of just what we're going to be able to do, but definitely making our money in those middle ground guys. And this was going to be my original point, was that with our higher end athletes, the biggest adjustment was that they weren't used to sprinting and doing time sprints. And we've kind of really just done dumbbell jumps and broad jumps, because spacing wise, we just could not do anything else. And so that's going to be a huge adjustment of the amount of jumping we're going to do in the new facility. But we've made such great sprint gains because we've gotten stronger, or we've gotten more powerful, or whatever it is. We haven't even jumped yet. And guys have made tremendous gains on that. But you're giving the high end athlete what they're good at and what they like doing, and all of a sudden they take off. You gave them a little bit of strength, and all of a sudden, boom, you're getting that much faster. And so again, you got to serve everybody, but the kids are seeing the results and they're buying into it. And that was a rant that went totally away from your point, but here we are.
Well, I mean, when you get on a good conversation topic, it's easy to go with it. So, but what you said in there was the prior school ran a 5-3-1, which I love the variety of 5-3-1, and I do a model myself. But you'd also mention the clean. So when you come in, your staple is a deadlift. That might be different than what the coaches were used to. Your style might be quite a bit different than what they're used to. Mm-hmm. How do you sell a new coach on what you're trying to do when he says, well, we're not cleaning, or we're not doing this, or we're not doing that? I don't know if it's going to work. How do you reassure them and start implementing your program and getting them on board with what you're trying to do?
So I've mentioned this before somewhere, but before I get into that, is man, I'm going to give our head coach credit. Coach Ford is I think he's the best head coach in Georgia. I could be very biased about that, but man, he's one of the best in the country at what he does, and he lets you do what you do. As long as you can explain it and explain why and show results for it, he's going to be all for it. He loves the weight room, and he does such a great job supporting that. And so before I even before I even got the job, and we were just talking, I had mentioned to him because I knew he liked cleans. I just from enough talking to him, I just said, "Hey, I don't do cleans, and we deadlift." And he's like, "Okay, that's interesting." And I said, "Here's why," and he said, "Well, great. I mean, if that's what you believe in, and that's good reasons why, great. We don't need to clean." I was like, "Okay, if that's," and he didn't even hesitate. Like there wasn't this, well, I don't know, this and that. It was, you know, Coach Garner's got a good reason. He's got his, and he'll show you why. And it's like, I've got the data to back it up. And here's what we do. And he's like, cool. And so when I got here, because no, and I've said this before, I probably said it on our first episode of like, there's really not many places you come into now that do a heavy deadlift, a truly heavy deadlift, a lot of, and especially if they haven't had a I'll call it like a qualified experienced strength coach. Like they probably didn't deadlift heavy. They just did some cleans, and again, nothing wrong with that. It's just what I don't do. I just don't do it. And so coming into this, and like I do everywhere, I think the number one way to get kids to buy in is from sprinting, and coaches to buy in is from sprinting, because it's the quickest thing to change in a kid when they haven't been exposed to it. And our group had not been exposed to laser timed sprints. And the best part about the lasers is it's not me, it's on the machine. It's not, the laser's not going to lie to you. And you pair that with the sumo or the deadlift, the top end speed's going to drop like crazy, and it's going to drop very quickly when you expose that to the kids. And so even just, hey, here's the first couple times we sprinted, and then within that month, they're hitting PRs. And they're gonna, when you first start doing it, they're gonna PR very regularly. Like they're just gonna keep doing that very regularly, and it's gonna slow down as you go. But the way that I got the guys and I got the coaches on board, number one with the athletes, was that when I first got there, we were 6 weeks out from our first game. And we're playing Houston County, which is a big time program, top 10 in the state. And I told the guys, I said, hey, we're running lasers this week, but just know 6 weeks from now, most of us, we're gonna hit PRs. Like that's gonna be our fastest week. And guys obviously PR'd between the start and there, but I just told them that week 6, the majority of our guys, we're gonna PR and we're gonna be running really, really fast. I don't know these kids, they don't know me. And I'm just like, this is what's gonna happen. And so we go and we progress. And I keep reminding them every week, hey, this Houston County week, we're going to PR and be really good. Houston County week, it was like 50% of our guys PR'd that week. And that's when I had them. Was like, I'd been saying since I first got there, this was going to be our best week. We go do it. And now the kids are like, okay, Coach Garner's got it, and then coaches were the same way. Coach Ford was fired up about it. Because again, they hear me saying all that stuff to the kids, and so that's when I got them. You know what I mean? And it's just so easy with the sprinting to get them improving quickly, where jumping can be hit or miss. I find, and where the sprinting initially is very easy to improve. And so again, that's where that kind of came into play of getting the buy-in, and with the coaches, I've had a one of our coaches say this to me is the biggest difference of what they were doing, and again, nothing wrong with what they were doing, to what we're doing now is like it flows and runs very college like. And that was something that, and he played in college. He's just like, yeah, it's just very college like, and versus what we were doing. Again, nothing wrong with it. And so, when guys that have played at a higher level see stuff, they're like, okay, this looks familiar. I know some of these things, and there's also some new things. Because that's the other thing too, and I've said this before, is you come in somewhere new, you can't just throw everything out. Like you've got to do things that are familiar to coaches and players so they don't think you're crazy. And then as you build trust and show improvement, now you can start throwing in some things that might be different and experiment with it because they have your trust. And that's where it gets fun. You can start experimenting with good stuff, but initially, man, sprints, deadlifts, they improve very quickly. And then if you can start telling them when they're going to be running their best, that's when I think you get them.
Yeah, the prediction definitely helps. And like you said, I've noticed that with jumps too. Jumps are come and go. You'll hit a massive PR this week, and it may take a week or two before you PR again, just because it's so up and down. I think jumps are maybe more effective than sprinting from a day-to-day basis, but I definitely could be wrong on that. I don't have any science to back that up. It's just what I've noticed.
I agree with that. And I think it's way more this could sound dumb, but I think it's way more effort based of like I feel like jumping or I don't feel like jumping today. Where like the sprinting, yeah, like you said, there's just I don't think there's as much fluctuation there on the sprinting compared to the jumping for sure. But I think the sprinting after going through this whole 6 months that we've had is way more impacted by how you wave your loads than anything else. Jumping, I don't think yes, you can do your jumps like that, but I think your sprinting is way more impacted by volume over your wave than anything else.
Now, I just had Bird on, and it'll be probably the episode before this one. And we did get to talk about the deadlift quite a bit. And I didn't think about this until this morning. So last year at NatCon, NHSSCA NatCon, you were moving, so you weren't able to get there. But this may make sense. I'll bounce this idea off of you. Michelle Freeman was there, Olympic sprinter. Mm-hmm. She was working on sprinting, and she was talking about through the acceleration, driving that hip forward, and then holding that hip forward, which you got to pretty much hold it forward with your glutes. I think you can build that in RDL, but I don't think you can build that in the RDL, the strength that it takes to keep that hip forward. I don't think you can build it as good as you can in a sumo deadlift, because essentially the lockout on a sumo deadlift, if you would rotate that 45 degrees, you would be in an acceleration position. So you're always working that at a very heavy weight. So you're building that glute that can help hold that hip in a forward position, where the RDL, I think, definitely helps. Don't get me wrong. And those two stacked, I think, really builds a very strong hip and a very strong glute, which improves your acceleration. Do you see it that way, or how do you see the sumo helping your sprinters so much?
Well, I think with the RDL, talk about that is, your RDL is limited by your grip. I mean, your deadlift is too, but like RDL big time is more limited by your grip than anything. So I think if at least my train of thought is if I am thinking I want to really drive the RDL, obviously you can mix grip and do all that, but I would just get straps, work heavy and then get some straps, start doing that. But I think too, man, if you're with the RDLs, I mean, I always feel it way more in the hamstring than the glute, where sumo can get into the glute and low back, and obviously not hamstring necessarily as much, I should say. Where RDL is way more of a hamstring low back thing. And again, I don't necessarily feel it a ton in the glutes. Sumo, again, hits both spectrums. Like you said, I mean, you got to do both. You need to do both. And I think with the sumo, like you're saying, the other kind of factor of it is, I think, and whether this is right or wrong, is like you get all those adductors involved and the hip mobility required to do it and get the positioning right. I think with the angles, like you're saying, there's definitely something to it. And at the end of the day, too, and I said this to one of our coaches, just explaining why deadlift over clean is that I think, to your point, the angles are good, but also at the end of the day, it's a relative strength problem, I like the deadlift because if you tell me between doing clean and doing deadlift, which is going to improve faster relative strength wise, it's going to be deadlift, right? Like in a year, what's a good year on a clean for a high school kid in terms of putting weight on? If you ask my kids that, they're going to say 20 pounds. That's what they're going to say. And this is after your initial whatever. And I said, okay, so we did this for 52 weeks a year and we put 20 pounds on, or we can deadlift. And that first year, I'm going to put 100 pounds on your deadlift. No questions asked. So what do we think is a better use of our time? I don't know. And then I'm willing to bet if your deadlift goes up, your clean's going to go up just from doing it, which we had a kid that loves to clean. He came in and cleaned one day just to do it, hit a lifetime PR on clean and hadn't done clean in months. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But that got away from your original point. But I do think there's the angles equation, like you're saying, with that deadlift, and for sumo in particular, not for like a conventional or the RDL. Like you don't get into that.
Now, with what you're saying on the clean, I know a lot of guys that listen clean. So we high pull. We do keep it in because I got guys going to college and they're going to be expected to do it. So I try to work through it. And I guess where I'm going with this is everybody's scared of the deadlift because it is so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But I have kids that come in here all the time and I have to totally teach them where the second pull is.
Yep.
They go straight from the floor into a clean position. And it's like, so which is more dangerous at the end of the day? I mean, I see more kids thrown to the wolves with cleans than I do anything else. And I know the people that listen to this show take a lot of time and a lot of pride in how their kids clean, but not every gym in America cares. Not every high school in America cares. A lot of times they just throw them a bar and they're like, let's clean.
Yep.
And we spend so much time getting to the second pull, and which makes no sense to me. If you're hang cleaning or you're power cleaning, you should be right there. You put them coming from the floor and they'll blow past it every time. So the dangers of both lifts, I feel like, are equal. It's just where do you want to spend your time coaching?
I think we might have texted about this. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure we did. Because I mean, we're doing speed sumo, and obviously we're doing heavy deadlift too. But because like we snatch, we hang snatch, and we'll go off of blocks in the new room, and we do that because we're hitting both sides of pulling from the floor and pulling from the knee up, right? Of like you just said, everybody in the clean, you are taught to be slow on the first pull, control it, and then the second pull, I'm going. Well, why not teach them to be violent off the floor from feet to knees with a deadlift, and then be violent from the knees up with a snatch or a hang clean, whatever you would like to prefer. It doesn't matter. But I look at it of we're strengthening the full side of that pull with the two methods that I think make the most sense. Because it doesn't make sense to me to tell a kid, let's be slow off the floor and then control it when I can be violent on both. Because if you're saying that we're going to then work on the second pull, well, then just hang clean. Or just do hang variations for athletes, which I totally agree with that. Because again, we're hang snatching all the time and doing all that. And I do hang snatch because I like the speed of it and I like the upper back development and the shoulder stability from it. And again, speed pulls from the floor, I'm getting both sides of that equation. So I'm really checking both boxes without worrying about the mobility per se to get to the clean position correct. Where I can do that from the hang clean and the kids are going to get it. And then I can get my sumo speed or sumo strength stuff from the floor. We touch both sides of the equation, like you said. And that's why I like doing both. But that's just me.
And I will say, I had an athlete here and we did what we do. And she looked really good when we sent her to college. Like she was jacked. She got down there heavy Olympic lifting. And she come back and she looked totally different. So obviously, the Olympic lifts build some muscles that your main power lifting lifts aren't getting to. So the variation, yes, I feel like super important. Like her upper back and her traps looked way different when she come back than when we sent her. So there's something in there that's being developed for sure.
Yeah, you're saying the Olympic stuff develops that upper back and the traps.
Yeah.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that.
And then what I did notice was the Olympic lifts will really tighten them lats up. You got to keep them pretty loose in there, or they get to where they can't catch stuff. So you have to the mobility is different on what you have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and that's the part with the snatch that I think is just it's just so good about it in that you're not worried about I mean, yes, there's still lat mobility, obviously, but not having to get those elbows up. And we front squat, so like we're working on that anyway. Like we're doing all these other things that are getting to that. But just man, the kids just at our level, at that high school level, man, it takes 2 seconds. The kids pick it up very quickly, and we're doing high pulls. I mean, we're doing all that stuff. And I may even get into this is something that Kerr mentioned when I was visiting of just doing some high pulls from the floor, but not as necessarily an Olympic movement, but more just almost a strength movement of pulling from the floor and just getting that bar high for sets of 6 for some upper back development. And I hadn't really thought of that. And I was like, that's kind of a good idea because if we're talking about we want good upper back and shoulder development, you want to put some tension on it, some control to it, not just taking the momentum up. Great, do some controlled high pulls and bring it back down to the floor, do some sets of 6 and call it a day. Again, I haven't done that. That was just a good idea I thought that he had.
I never considered myself an Olympic lift guy, so I didn't get crazy far into the cleans or the snatches, but I figured I would start with the high pull. And so we've done that for a while. And to me, what I see right now is we've spent so much time with the high pull that if you watch those kids every once in a while, they'll just like naturally catch it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just there. You don't even hardly have to teach the catch. It's once that high pull is right, everything's in position and they'll just drop their arms underneath and catch it. They're like, oh, what am I doing? It's like, all right, we finally are getting somewhere.
Well, we do complexes every day. We're doing some sort of barbell complex every day. We will start adding in some dumbbell complexes now that we've got dumbbells. But we do some sort of now that it's off season, I change the complex weekly. But in season, I was doing the same complex every day. It was a snatch complex. But in the off season, every week is a different complex. I just do that to keep it fresh, but also get them paying attention and instead of going through the motions, it's something different this week, target some different things. And then once we start adding in the dumbbell complexes, man, those are a different breed compared to the barbell. The dumbbells are 1,000 times worse than the barbells.
I like the dumbbell complexes. They can get down to a light enough weight. They can kind of tinker with some stuff, and then you get them off and going, and they're rolling pretty good. I feel like the safety in a dumbbell complex is there a little more so than a barbell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the grip and upper back development, I think, is way more in the dumbbells than a barbell. Just because of all the stability that's got to be involved and all that different movement handles of the or of the dumbbells are different. I just think it's good to mix in both, but particularly again that upper back and what it does with those dumbbells, man, it's just different. It's just different, and I think again because it's that stability that's involved in that is really just the name of the game on that end.
Now, we had talked the last time you were on. I had all my notes printed out from the last time we talked, and you had done some 5-3-1 stuff, and the school you took over did some 5-3-1 stuff. Where are you at now? Are you still looking at a 5-3-1, or have you moved away from that? How are you looking at programming what you do?
So we don't do a 5-3-1 currently. I was rolling through that prior, but currently it's really more just I mean, 5-3-1 is still linear, but it's still a linear progression, basically varying between dynamic effort and max effort, depending on the week and whatever. But it's really more, we'll just say rep maxes on a given week. So it might be, let's say it's bench, okay, and it's a 6 rep max week. Then next week is 5, next week is 4. We just go through that progression. And the reason why I did that was because, and we kind of touched on this probably before, is that I think with 5-3-1, you have to, 1, make sure your maxes are dialed. 2, you have to make sure your kids understand we're going to push. Like we're going as many as we absolutely can get with that, leave one in the tour tank or whatever. And I think that what happens more often than not when you're dealing with the large groups and what we were dealing with, I mean, in Cleburne, it was 100 some odd kids, but here is a lot different in that I might have 50, and now that seniors are out, I've got like 36 or something. It's easy. And so the 5-3-1, your kids have to understand to go all out. And I think most kids will not go to where you want them to go. Especially your I'm going to say very good athletes that didn't necessarily want to push that hard. Your weight room warriors are going to go for it, but your guys not so much in the training will not go for it. And so I think where the rep maxes or really just setting a specific number to hit is that it now everybody knows we're hitting sixes and you're going to get to six. It's all right. You did 185 for six. Hey man, go to 195. Let's get that for six. Instead of just, hey, how many can you get? I just think there's a mental switch on just the chasing of that, and that some guys do a great job, other ones do not. I do think there's value in doing a back off set and going max reps. There's 1000% value in that, and I like doing that. I just think with the coaching of a room and getting kids to really push themselves, I lean toward hit the certain reps, and if you think you can do more, let's add weight and hit the rep, because the guy, it's just more, it gives them an attainable number to hit, because the guys are just like, well, it's 5+. How many do you want me to get? As many as you can. Well, how many? If you tell them 10, they're going to go to 10. If I tell them 12, they're going to go, you know what I mean? And so then when you think about managing a room, it's just way easier for me to go walk around and know to look for 6. And that's what I'm looking for. And then control the weights that way. But we're also way more into now my program has truly, and we were doing this in Cleburne on the back end of true kind of conjugate setup, where I wasn't fully into that until the spring before I left Texas. And so here, from the get-go, we're doing that, and it's just easier to manage. And our guys are good lifters. That's the other part. Is like our guys are good lifters. They like to put weight on the bar and see how many reps they can get. But it's a lot for their brains to go, we're going for 6 today. We're going for 5 versus as many as you can.
I know we had talked about this quite a bit, me, you, Tucker. We had seen great growth in our lower body movements, and then we had witnessed a little bit of a stall out in our upper body movement. And we had all discussed it a little bit, and we took on a brief maximal tension model, which I use the brief maximal tension almost as an accessory. How are you utilizing that model where you're at?
Yeah, so I'm not doing like a true brief maximal tension, that what like Fahey and Goodman and them are talking about, and what Tucker's doing, and obviously what you're doing. It's still the idea of we're gonna do more reps, because if there's anything that I'm seeing now that my groups are so small, that I can really see training way better, and I'm not doing the logistics management as much. That like when I watch freshmen, I think the 3 rep max on a freshman is the most valuable max. Not that we do singles, but you got a kid that'll barely crush a single, and then all of a sudden they blow up reps 2 and 3, and we've talked about that. And so I really value that. And so with that train of thought, what we're basically doing is, let's take we'll say on bench, is we are gonna I really bumped the volume up of we're gonna bump up to 8 rep maxes, and then we're just gonna work our way down. And the train of thought of that goes back to like the 10-second capacity stuff of that, and anything under 10 seconds is true strength work. And when you look at how long it takes to do a bench rep and how long it takes to do squats and deadlifts, I can do 5 bench reps in 5 seconds, and let's say a second and a half or whatever you want to say. If I do 5 on squat, it's probably going to take me 15, 20 seconds. If it's a true heavy 5, it's going to take me 15 or 20 seconds. which no longer becomes strength work. It just becomes strength capacity, or however you want to frame it. It becomes strength capacity work. And so with that train of thought, you know, strength work for squat is really triples or lower, in my opinion. And capacity work is going to be those fours, five, sixes. And for bench, okay, if that's our train of thought, and if I was using the same volume for bench, well, I'm never really getting into capacity work like I need to in order to bring up strength. And so running up what I'll say is like probably 3 weeks of, I would argue, capacity of a true heavy six on bench. I think you get to 10 plus. If it's truly heavy, we're not talking like speed here. You know, those 8, 7s, and 6s, maybe 5, but definitely 8, 7, 6 is capacity. And so we're basically just taking a capacity block and then heading into a strength block. And I think that volume, man, you just gotta put more volume on the upper body, considering that on lower, you're getting all this extra work, playing wise and obviously lifting wise. But I just bumped the volume up on the upper. And to your point with brief maximal tension is we're not operating necessarily. So what I do is I put a percentage sheet out, and the starting percentage on the sheet is going to be at 90 to 92.5 relative intensity. And so they're not going to fail. They're going to hit it. And if they feel good, they go up and they go up. And I give them weights to give them guides, but they can do what they want. But there's guides there. And I give them the true max of, if it's sixes, you know, I'm going to put 83.5 or 82.5 or 85, whatever you think. I use 82.5 for that 6-rep max. And I just tell them, if you can beat that number, let's beat it. If not, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And so it gives them a little bit of the gap versus from what most guys run of that true brief maximal tension of a true 3, 4, and 5 or 6-rep max. Like we start lower and then we go. But I do that, one, to ensure that we're not failing. I don't want to fail. And two, I think there's a little more value. I think there's value in the bar speed aspect of that, of still keeping it moving at a pretty good speed. And then really it just ends up being 1 or 2 sets of that kind of strain. And we've done a good bit of bar speed, and then we strain for a set or 2, and doing it that way.
What we've kind of done, and I think me and you have talked about this a little bit through text messages, is we've always ran like a reverse 5-3-1. So what we started doing was we would stay with that, and then we added the brief maximal tension almost as an accessory. And what you had said about volume, Monty Sparkman I was texting with him back and forth, and that's kind of what he alluded to too, is like volume's the key. You've got to get those reps in to get that bench press drove up. So I started looking at it like that and the different things me and you had talked about. So we still have our reverse 5-3-1 model. And on the backside, I would call it an accessory, a secondary lift, and we'll do a brief maximal tension there. And then when the 3 weeks are over, we'll take whatever our 5-3-1 was and we'll move that into our brief maximal tension. And then we'll run a new lift in. And then I started doing inclines and flats, so that you always have a flat in the program and you always have an incline in the program. You essentially get 6 weeks out of that lift. And we do it like you say. So we know what our 5 is because we've already done it in the main cycle. So when we roll that into brief maximal tension, there's no finding that number. We know that number. And then like you said, they can go as high as they want as long as they're hitting that rep. So let's say for the ease of math, you got a kid that's running 200 for 5, and you know you're going to up him 10%, so he's going to go to 210 for 3s. Well, that's his start. 210's his start. He can go 220. He can go clear up to 245. If he can hit it for 3, I don't care. You go as high as you want. But then when he comes back around and he goes to 4, that Wednesday or whatever the day is that you're going to go 4 reps, he's still at his base. It's still 210. You're still looking for 210 at 4. And then the process starts over, because otherwise it seems like you outrun yourself really quick if you don't start where you should start. Like let's say he hit 245 for 3. Let's say he was having a day and he hit 245 for 3. Well, if you adjust that number and you come back Wednesday and you want him to hit 245 for 4, he may be trashed out from that lift. So he may be 215 for 4 is all he can do. Well, at least then he's still in his base number, if that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. And I don't adjust maxes for 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever. Like you literally, like you said, is we're basically doing this. We are doing the same of that. We're going to run 3 weeks or 4 weeks of something on our dynamic effort, and then it's going to go into our max effort. It just kind of, so that essentially just becomes this linear buildup. And then whatever my plan is to run next max effort cycle starts on dynamic effort. Basically and I think for the high school kid, it just helps with teaching form and getting all that stuff down. I've still got a number for you. Like we're getting a number to base it off of. And with the dynamic effort for us is that, let's say it's 75% on the day. I let them go basically 75 to 80. I don't have VBT, so it's just, if you feel great, hey, go to 77 and a half. You feel whatever, go to 80. And then you top out. I don't let you go up from there. And most kids, they stick, they're like, yep, they stick right in there and they feel fine. But I do think there's value in the longer build, like what you're saying I think there's value in the longer build because you're actually going to see change, and versus if I'm going just 3 weeks, yes, there's going to be a little bit of a difference, but I like showing kids a bigger gain. Oh, you did 5 pounds. Well, the kid doesn't care about 5 pounds. They care about 10, 15, 20 pounds, whatever you can get them over 6 weeks. And if you can do that, it's just creating buy-in over time. And like you said, you still keep that base number to ensure they don't miss anything. And that way, over time, great, you felt great. But then the next week, like you said, I got the 245, and the next week I just got 225. And it's teaching the guys, and this was something I've talked to the guys about, of like, I don't care if you didn't hit the same thing that you hit last week. That doesn't matter, because it's probably going to be lower this week, but then week 3, it's going to come back up more than likely. And that's where I'm very adamant about, if you hit something, a PR, great. If you don't, I don't care. But here's your minimum. And that way, when we do go for it, they're gonna blow it up and they're gonna crush it.
And it's a conversation you have to have with your better lifters. Your better lifters are going to get affected more than your younger lifters that don't have that training capacity. So
for sure,
a really heavy day is going to trash out one of your better lifters more so than it is a freshman with, they can recover so fast that it's not going to really matter to them too much. But a senior that's been in the program for 4 years, that might really affect him a lot more.
Mm-hmm. And especially when it's week 1, right, of a new movement. If they've been doing front squat and then we go back to a back squat or whatever, all of a sudden they're like, this is hard. It's just different movement. And especially that week 1, you just try to keep them mentally like, hey guys, it's just week 1. You're going to be okay. It'll build back up. Don't worry. That was something when the season was done, and it might have been the week after Thanksgiving break, we did back squat for the first time in a very long time. We'd been box squatting, and the guys were just like, this feels terrible. I'm like, yeah, it's going to feel bad. But, some guys had a good amount of guys hit PRs, and they were surprised by that. And that's been the fun part, with the rotating of exercises and stuff, is you come back and then the guys are like, oh, I hit a PR and we haven't done it. I'm like, yeah, welcome, welcome, welcome to the system, buddy. It works. Just keep trucking. But yeah, man, that first week back is always rough for them. When I think the other thing I thought about too was, you're talking about like doing your 5-3-1 and then the brief maximal tension after, is I've really liked, for me personally, I've messed around with the kids for a week or 2, but like for me personally, I've been doing, like a max effort squat, a 1 to 5 or whatever. But then afterwards, I'm doing a 5 or 6 accessory deadlift. And I've really liked how that's turned out, just like 3 sets of 6 or of a snatch grip deadlift or an RDL. Like I've really liked how that felt after doing that.
Now, with you saying that, I have started adding way more snatch grip deadlifts or snatch grip RDLs pendlay rows. I think that has a lot of merit, but I started putting it in the beginning. So it's like a warm up. So they're probably not as heavy as what they really should be, but I think it starts getting the mind connected to the muscles that are getting ready to be used for the heavier lifts. So maybe it has a psychological carryover, but doing it your way, doing it on the back end would really help too, because now you have a kid that's already like, he hit a huge deadlift, let's say. Well, he's feeling pretty strong. He's going to go hard on those snatch grip RDLs.
And they're already warmed up. And I think there's something too, like you're saying on the deadlift. Okay, after deadlift, I might go lunges. I might go heavy barbell lunges. And it's not a deadlift. You know, they're not like, well, I just deadlifted, I'm going to deadlift again. Okay, so now it's, hey, you're going to these lunges. You just got 3 sets. You know, it's not 8 sets. It's just 3, you know, because the guys are, at this point, it's like, coach, we got 8 sets of 3. Yep. You know, you get them used to that. So then when you tell them, it's just 3 sets, babe, just 3 sets, hit them real quick. And, you know, there's no clock. It's just go, you know, get your 3 sets of 6 in, and then we'll go to this other stuff. Like I've really liked how that's worked for me, and just feeling really good of just rolling through it, man, touching it and going to the next thing.
Now, you've talked about dynamic effort a little bit, and I was wondering, are you a VBT guy, or are you running your dynamic effort off percentages?
So at Cleburne, I was going off of VBT, and then here I don't have VBT, and I'm not banking on getting it anytime soon. And so in a perfect world, yeah, you know, I'd love to have some velocity stuff, but honestly, it's been kind of nice going back to just percentages, of just not having to worry about getting the VBT set up and doing all that stuff. And it's worked really well. I mean, the only place that we are just missing potential massive gains is the speed deadlift, you know, because I just think the speed deadlift on a VBT, you can get so just gnarly heavy on that and still have a good speed pull. Where on squat, I don't think there's nearly the fluctuation, but on a deadlift, I think there is. In terms of like you're going to hit a higher percentage on that deadlift than what you think you can at the speed that you're asking to do, versus on a squat, it's going to be pretty close, I think, unless it's a freak kid and they're you know, a really good athlete. You know, those kids are going to hit a much higher percentage of what you're asking. And so, no, we've just been doing percentages, and the generally speaking, you're in that 70 to 85 zone, you know, and since doing that, things have gotten dramatically better on our lifting side, and being a little bit heavier than what would be in a textbook per se, you know, but obviously that's with bands and stuff. So it's just different, but the heavier percentage, man, with the high school kids is definitely the way to go. They're not going to fail. They're going to feel really good. I've been doing it myself, and it's been nice. But yeah, so just the percentages, no VBT. And again, and then we're not really doing, you know, I call it dynamic effort, but we're not doing dynamic effort on bench. That was just rep maxes. But I frame it as dynamic effort, you know, of to our kids, hey, this is our kind of speed days we're doing, and rep maxes. I say both of, hey, we're going 8-7-6, you know, those rep maxes, and then just work our way up. And so you know, like many guys have said, I don't think it's as applicable on the bench. But the other part about the dynamic effort that we work towards is that we are going to typically be in that 85 to 92.5 relative intensity. So we're going to be somewhere in that zone when you talk about dynamic effort days. It's still technically strength work. When you talk about relative intensity, but you know, there's the bar speed side of it.
I will have to agree with you on the dynamic bench. At least I have not found the number yet that drives a raw bench press. I've tried 0.5, I've tried 0.6. You know, a squat at a 0.6, if you're doing a dynamic squat, that seems to drive your max. On a deadlift, I think a 0.5, you can get down into a 0.4, but a 0.5 will drive your max. I don't know that I found the speed on a bench that I can say, if you run this bench at 0.7, it will increase your bench press. I haven't found it. So that's kind of the next evolution we're probably headed toward, is doing away with the dynamic bench for a while and just more of a conventional style and see what happens. I don't think it moves like I want it to move.
Yeah, and I think there's something to the when we're talking about bench here, is I think that you've got to have a day where you strain, a rep max day, and you've got to have a day of not a true strain, but more, again, 90 to 92.5 relative intensity. Again, we live there a lot on that relative intensity zone. It's still heavy enough that it's strength, but it's not a true strain. And that's, again, I just think you have to touch that strain at least once a week on a bench, maybe twice, depending on what you want to do. And it's not going to be a big deal if you touch it twice and do it on multiple variations. Because that's something where I don't love to do 2 flat benches in a week personally. I like having a variation and then hit a flat bench, or like you said, one's an incline, one's a flat, something along those lines. There's always going to be a flat bench day, and then there's always going to be a variation day. And that's going to be a rep max day or whatever that looks like. But no, I don't think that speed bench, man, it just doesn't. I think a lot of bench is bar speed off the chest, and then you've got to learn to strain at the top, because there's just going to be that big sticking point of you've got to be able to drive it, and you've got to feel the strain, because you can't strain on a bench that long. And so you've got to touch it so often, because you're not straining a long time, if that makes sense. Where like a deadlift, it's like the video I posted a couple weeks ago of us doing heavy sumos, and that kid and our kid pulled 500, and it was the slowest deadlift I've ever seen in my life, and he got it. And I told him to call it, but he got it. Like, you can't do that on bench. It's just you're gonna strain for a second, if you know what I mean, and you're gonna get it or you're not gonna get it. And there's way more with your technique and getting out of the groove of bench, I think, than anything else too. Of you can't strain that long, because you'll get out of your groove of hitting a bench.
That's the hardest part, especially with young lifters. If you do have a speed day, they're going so fast, there is no groove. At
Yep.
one point, it's at their belly button, at another point, it's at their chin.
Yep.
It's relatively pointless, because the bar's going everywhere. I have found that the incline press teaches the groove better than any other lift.
I could agree with that.
Because
I definitely agree with that.
that's the lift the weight wants to drift away from them instead of going back to the rack. So if you can get them where they're incline pressing really well, and they feel that push back to the rack when you put them on a flat bench, it seems like they really do well.
Well, when you do incline too, the part for me, especially if you do a heavy incline, you ain't done a heavy incline in a long time, is your lats and serratus down here get wrecked, just from the stability side, like you're saying, because that bar wants to go away from you. And so all that stuff has to work, which then plays back into your regular bench, because you're just fighting it. And that's something that I don't know that many people think about, of just when you're on that incline, whether it's 1 or 2 clicks, especially 2, that lat and serratus muscle down there is working so much more, and that helps, again, keep that bench dialed into the groove, like you said.
Now, I've done it both ways. I've done VBT and percentage, just like you. I'm a little more VBT centric on my dynamic day. On our max effort day, I'm not worried about it. Hit what you can hit. I don't know this. I'm just starting to wonder, and I was going to bounce it off you. It seems like your strength athletes, a 0.6, let's just talk about the squat. A 0.6 on the squat is a dynamic day for them, and that will drive their max. But a twitchy kid does not need to be that slow. A twitchy kid, it almost seems like a 0.75 or something like that will drive their max better. I'm just starting to notice that now, and keeping records of that. Is that something you've noticed, or am I kind of just wanting something to be there that's not there?
I think the idea is really good. I think that's a great train of thought, because so with Coach Gillespie at Liberty, we were maxing to 0.6 back squat. Now, everything was framed around the clean. It was about improving clean. It was not about improving anything else other than clean and bench. And so the the back squat served as a purpose of improving the clean, which obviously it kind of does anyway, but it was just there for that. And so they would max to 0.6, and you got guys squatting 600 pounds at 0.6, which is insane. And then, you're using the percentages off of that. Okay, well, we're hitting 60 to 70, 75, maybe 80 on the high end, which in actuality is like 50, maybe sub 50 to 70. And that's where the majority of the squats are. And so, and now you're talking, okay, FCS Division I football, you got a lot of twitchy dudes, and their squats would just blow up. I mean, they would put on so much weight on that 0.6 squat time after time after time, and all we're doing is fast squats. We're not squatting slow, and then they're using single leg work like lunges. We would do heavy lunges all the time, of 45 pounds minimum for walking lunges, and then you hold what you can for some in place lunges forward and backwards. And so that would be the strength chase. And so I think I think you're at a point there, because now when you start thinking about what a lot of these Division I big time programs are talking about, they are talking about naturally the bar speed on the squats, and the guys are then like, oh, we've got linemen that are hitting 800 pounds at 0.6 and or 0.7. Everybody kind of is saying they're in that zone, and that's equating to 950, 1,000 pound squat maybe, on some of these cats, and they're just moving the bar fast, and those guys are pretty twitchy. So I think there's value in what you're saying, and plus at the end of the day too, you are improving what they're good at. You're working on their strength, and so those twitchy cats, they're going to want that twitchy work, and that's going to keep improving their strength. And just like the strength guys, if you're in that slower zone, it's going to work on what they're good at.
I realize you have to build up the weakness. I totally get that, but you can't neglect the strength in the process. So if their max is going up, they're gonna catch the other side, right? Like, so your twitchy guys are gonna catch the slow moving stuff because their max is going up. So they're gonna move weight slow. It's more of the other end where your strength guys, you have to find a way to get them fast, which usually we'll use a K box or something like that to try to put in that other side of it to get them there. But
well, I think too, there's something to the idea of, somebody had said this before, and I can't tell you who. I just remember hearing it, of deciding, and agree or disagree here, I don't know, of, do you want your squat to serve as your let's say back squat? Do you want back squat to serve as your strength developer or your power developer? And then what's going to be your strength developer on the squat? Do you want it to be a specific variation? Do you want to do it all? It's deciding how you want to use it and then hammer it. And so again, kind of goes back to Coach Gillespie, and that perspective was, okay, squat is going to be our power developer. That's going to be part of that process. And the lunges and single leg work is going to be the strength developer of the lower body. Just, and not, I don't want to say confusing the two, but just, this is what we're going to do. And this is what we're going to do. Okay. We're going to use the bench press and those different variations. Okay, we're going to use those for strength, and we're going to use the variations as the true strength work, and we're going to use flat bench as the capacity, volume, bar speed work, quote unquote. And then we test it, and then we go about it, and that's just something to think about, of making the decisions of what's going to be the thing that you push on a specific movement for a block or your year or whatever you want to say.
And that makes sense. When I'm programming out, that's what I'm looking at. We're trying to hit the whole strength curve every workout, whatever that may be. So yeah, you figure out what end you want your power development and what end you want your slow moving strength, and then fill everything else up in between. So I think what you're saying has a lot of validity when you sit down and figure out what you want to be the driver on what end of the spectrum. Then at least it gives you a roadmap of where your workouts are going to go. And then after a little bit of time, you evaluate if that's what you want, and then you make the adjustments from there.
Mm-hmm. What are you, I mean, what were you seeing that got you to that point with those speeds?
So an accident. What happened was I'm programming we all kind of run the same program in season, out of season, but I was adjusting the speeds. So if you were in season, I wanted you running a 0.75. If you were out of season, I wanted you running a 0.6. Well, some of the kids that come in, they were out of season, but they read the paper wrong. We didn't have enough conversation, so it was a mistake on my part. They saw 0.75, so they were running 0.75 out of season. It just so happened these were twitchy kids, so it worked out in my favor. Well, this kid is running stupid weight at 0.75, like it's just going up and up and up and up. And my strength kids are running 0.6, and their weight's going up too, and both of them's maxes are going up in the same direction. And so I started sitting back and evaluating it, and I started talking to the kid. I'm like, you've been running 0.75? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, you're out of season. You're supposed to be running 0.6. And he's like, well, I read the paper wrong. We didn't have this conversation. But I'm like, you're lifting more weight at 0.75 than a lot of these guys are at 0.6. So maybe there's something to that. And he goes, well, another kid's been running 0.75 too. Just so happens he's another twitchy kid. Now his squat's through the roof. But my strength guys running 0.6, their squats are through the roof. So, but I've also seen them in peak, because otherwise it would be easy to say, well, then just take your strength guys up to 0.75 and see if that works. Well, I've kind of done that in peak, and I've seen the strength guys struggle moving heavy weight at 0.75, at 0.8, but they're really good at 0.6. So it's like this course of time, I've noticed that the twitchy guys just do better at those faster speeds, and it drives their max harder, where I don't think it does the same for strength athletes. I think they get up in them speeds and they struggle, and I don't think it moves the dial that much for them.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to hitting your strengths that you're good at and just pouring into that. You know, I definitely have gone away from, and I don't know how much I necessarily was into it per se, but the thought of, well, if it's a twitchy kid, they don't need to do twitchy stuff. You know, give them their weakness. You know, you don't want to take away the thing that's made them who they are. Let's keep that great, and then sprinkle in or put in those things that they're not so good at, and all of a sudden they take off. Like that's the easiest part about high school kids is you want to, especially if you come from a program that is just lifting and not sprinting and jumping, those twitchy kids, all of a sudden you're still doing their strength, but then I've put back in the stuff they're good at, and all of a sudden they're like, Coach, I feel amazing. I'm feeling really good, and they're flying through, and all of a sudden they like the lifting because they're like, oh man, this lifting is helping. But what they don't know is it's because we're just doing the things they're good at, and we're just hammering down those things, and vice versa. The strength kids are still doing the stuff that they need to do, but then they never got the stuff that the weakness, and then all of a sudden it's like, man, these weights are blowing up. Because I got all these things that they're just not. So it's a win-win for everybody, and it's getting the. I still think the hardest thing is to get the super twitchy kids to understand that the lifting is going to be their biggest beneficiary of getting them jumping better and running better. That's the part I think that's the hardest sell. It's not hard to get us. It's not hard to sell a muscle strength kid to jump and sprint because it's not hard. They're just not good at it. They're just like, I'm not very good at this. Well, now it's just getting all the strengths you got and put it in the right spot. Where I had a specific kid on our team that maybe wasn't pushing himself every day that he could have in the weight room. And I told him, I said, hey, give me 2 weeks of just really push like I want you to on these deadlifts and squat like I want you to. And I'm telling you right now, you're going to hit a PR. Because he hadn't been hitting a PR. He's already a fast kid, pretty fast kid. He hadn't really PR'd in a very long time, like abnormally long, like it'd been too long. And I said, I went up to him one day and I was like, you're not lifting like you need to. And that's why your sprinting's not moving. And 2 weeks, he went for it. And him and his buddy PR'd that second or third week. And of course it was like, I told you, that's all you had to do. And then you got him from there. But anyway, I'm going on a rant. But to your point, man, I think it's just going down that, keeping them what they're good at, and then sprinkle in the stuff that they need on the weakness side.
And that's why I like Conjugate so much. It's because you know you're catching the weakness too, and you're bringing that weakness up, but you're not getting away from what they're good at and what's driving the change.
And I think too, and I wasn't always doing Conjugate. That's the thing, is like I wasn't always doing Conjugate, and everything is technically a variation of Conjugate if you really think about it. But the the way of like max effort and dynamic effort, I wasn't always doing that setup. But the thing about it is, with the high school kid, and Fahey and other guys have said this, and I definitely see it, is that those guys can improve so quickly. Of just stuff can just stack super quick, and you've got to just keep chasing it, I think. And we're not talking like one rep maxes here, right? We're talking about any sort of rep max you want to talk about. Like, you're chasing something, and those guys improve so much, and the high school kid cares about it. They care about seeing those numbers, and they're gonna go whether you want them to or not. Like, if they really want to know, they're gonna go lift somewhere and find out. And I want to be around when they do that, and I want them to trust what we're doing, that they don't go do that. And I don't care if they do, they do. But the part about it is, like, they're gonna go do it somewhere, so I want it to be in front of me, and I want it to be around us in that environment. And that's the thing about it, is I'm just keeping up with it helps me keep up with their rate of progress, and expecting certain gains, and just snowballing it. And previously, it just, you're training, and then you test it and hope it worked. And now it's like, I know here's what's going to happen, and you start predicting sprint times and stuff like that. It's you got them.
I'll tell you what, you kind of hit it on there a little bit with kids that are just naturally good. I think small town coaches really understand this, because there's kids starting as freshmen varsity because there's no kids starting as sophomores. So they're really hard to sell strength and conditioning to. Why do I need a coach? I'm playing. I'm a freshman. I'm starting. I don't need it. I think your bigger schools have a little bit more of an advantage, because those kids have to wait so long before they play. I'm not saying they don't have freaks. I'm not saying they don't have a freshman or a sophomore that steps in and plays, but you may not see 4 freshmen playing, or 6 sophomores playing, whatever the case may be. It's really hard to sell those kids on why they need to be in the weight room, because they're playing.
Yeah, and the most frustrating part about that is, and we've talked about this, man, is the kids, a male athlete's biggest performance gains is between sophomore and junior year. Like, it happens every freaking time. It doesn't matter where I go. Sophomore to junior year is the biggest transformation of a kid. And I think there's obviously some biological factors to that, naturally. And I think the other massive factor to that is the sophomore kid is still an underclassman and motivated to work, because they're now coming up on their junior year. They're now coming up, and so they're going to get all these daggone gains, and biologically it's dialed up during that time too. And then after that, when they get into their junior year, they go one of two ways. They either, and the same thing for sophomores, they either decide they're going to work and they're going to be awesome, or they're going to not work because I'm good enough, and then we're going to hang out, and then they're going to roll around senior year and be like, man, I am not doing as well as I thought I would, or didn't improve as much, or they're seeing other guys that worked and now they want to work. It's like, well, brother, it's a little late. We're going to work, but like, just imagine if you would have just done something where you could be. And that's the part that's frustrating about the younger cats of, if they didn't work, and man, even worse, if they didn't have like weights, if they didn't work out their freshman year, and now all of a sudden they're working out sophomore year, they're so behind of what they could be, and they might still be doing well, but it's just incredible to see, if you have a program that lifts like that, of how dramatically different guys are year to year to year versus who does train and doesn't train. It's so crazy to see the differences on those kids.
And you get a lot of kids that come in, they work really hard to get the spot. And then once they get the spot, they're done. You never see them again. You help them get where they wanted to go. And then by the end of the season, those kids are back on the bench, and they can't figure out why. It's I don't know. It has to be maintained, and and chased really hard. And
And go ahead.
well, it seems like juniors are the ones that show up and work hard, like you said, because their
Mm-hmm.
time's almost up. And especially if they're thinking they can play college ball, it's like, well, where were you a few years ago? Now you're chasing it the hardest you can, but there's only so much time.
Mm-hmm. And what I love about what I do in a team setting, and now that I'm back on field coaching, there's some more validity to what you say, because all of a sudden you're a sport coach. If you're not a sport coach, other sport coaches don't necessarily take your word as valuable. It's amazing how much of a difference that makes. And so now what I love about what we've got going here is that, because I'm coaching football again, is now, you're measuring all this stuff and you're seeing performance gains and speed gains and jumps and sprints, blah 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 blah. Now all of a sudden, when I tell a coach, hey, you should maybe look at this kid, because of the physical ability of what they're doing. That doesn't mean they can play ball. You still got to play ball. But now it's, hey, this kid is running as fast as what this perceived fast kid is. Now all of a sudden they look at this kid different, or like this lineman is now lifting as much as the starting lineman. Now all of a sudden that's a different perception. And there's a lot of validity in that. There's a lot of value of showing, we've got these two linemen that work out in the morning for us, and one is one of the strongest kids in our program. The other one is an average sort of strength kid, but like since working out with that kid, he has totally stepped up his game lifting wise, but he's also lifting with a guy that's stronger, but he's getting there. He's very close. But like now I'm, telling the coach of, hey, this kid, he's starting to get up to those levels. And now that perception changes. We had that happen with a couple of our kids of, they run the sprint time and all of a sudden it's faster than wide receivers times. And it's a linebacker. And it's like, and he's maybe or maybe not playing as much as he could be. Hey, you might want to think about this kid. He's running faster than our receivers on this fly time. Not saying his 40 is better, but like the fly time is like, hey, he's better. Might want to think about finding a way to get him on the field. You're leaving athleticism off the field. And that's kind of the discussion I have, is more just about, here's some raw athleticism. We should probably find a way to use it. And we got a couple kids like that defensively where they're starting to really come through, and it's like, we just got to find a place, put those guys on the field and make them play.
Now that's a very interesting conversation topic, because I've thought about this a lot. I think kids need a mediator. I think they get boxed up so quick.
Yeah.
And I've just seen it and experienced it, where all of a sudden everybody in a certain circle thinks something of this kid.
Yep.
Whether it's good, bad, indifferent, and that kid can't go either way. If they just think this kid's good, he's always going to be good because they sit around and talk about how good he is. Well,
Bingo.
He's not working. He just, he's not doing what he needs to do. And this kid that you thought was bad or whatever, well, he starts catching him. If that athlete doesn't have a mediator on his side, he may never break through the cycle of what everybody's trained themselves to believe.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. And I think there's a psychological game on the kid of, well, the coaches say I'm really good, and so all of a sudden they don't, you're not seeing, like you said, hey, this kid has messed up the past 10 plays in a row. He's given up deep balls. He's done this. He's done that. And no, but he's our best player. Film doesn't lie. Film doesn't lie. And that's where it is fun to get into that. Because I think what I'm very good at, that I've just developed over the years, is I think I'm very good at talent identification in where to put a kid, and not and other than like, hey, this kid probably best at a running back, this kid probably best at a linebacker or whatever, because those middle ground kids, those are the ones you got to put in the right spot and kind of figure where to put them. It's pretty easy to tell, obviously, like, he's a lineman, he's a defensive end. But now those mids are the ones you kind of figure out. Like, let's take a running back, for example. I don't want a running back. I think that running back is the number one position on the field for football that requires the most natural ability. in that because of the vision. You got to have a kid that has vision to run and make cuts, and you can't just like coach that. And 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 if you get a kid that doesn't have great vision, he's not going to run well. He's not going to cut. He might run fast, but his agility is terrible. And if he runs with super high knees, he's not going to cut fast. Like those are things like that I think I'm good at because of what I do. And again, man, you have that, like you said, mediator of, hey man, you might want to rethink what you think of this kid and maybe look at him and what they can do of, they've been playing, let's say they've been playing safety. Hey, he might be better at inside backer or outside backer or, whatever, just examples of, because in high school, man, it's about getting the best athletes on the field and figure out where to put them. It's not college. I want the best dudes on the field, and we can figure out where to play. But yeah, I think the mediator part is super important, and you got to have a guy or two on staff that looks at that from a big picture and not from a biased. This kid was really good, and now he's always good, and he can never make a mistake. Even though I got this other kid that's doing everything right, but because of you thought this about him one time, all of a sudden he's always that.
And when you're in a small town, I think those kids get crowned way early.
Yes.
In sixth grade or junior high, they get crowned as the athlete. Well, by the time they're a sophomore, they're a shell of what they were because everybody's caught them. But in your mind, they're still the best athlete on the field because you get caught in this little bit of a circle of this continuous echo chamber of, yeah, but you remember in junior high when he did, well, it's not junior high anymore. All these other
Nobody cares.
Caught him,
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares, but that kid's still seeing all this playing time. You're like, wait a second, we got to rethink this.
Yes, 100%.
Now that's outside looking in. I'm not up there listening to the conversations. I don't know. It's just something you think you pick up on. That doesn't mean it's true. So
I think it's more true than not. More true than not, for sure.
Now, the last time we were on, we got pretty deep into jumps. You were doing a lot of like 5-3-1 jumps. You were doing things like that. How are you driving your jumps now? Have you stayed to that theory, or are you doing other things that are driving your verticals and your broad jumps?
So we'll still do, and again, we haven't done it since I've got here because we like just the gym setup. We our old gym setup, we had like 20 some racks in there, but they were all platforms and it was wall to wall, just stuff. So you talk about rolled ankles and just, you can't, we could do dumbbell jumps and we'd have to go out in the gym basically for broads. And so we will get into our conjugate jumps. So that's just what I call it, of we're going to rotate jump variations week to week to week. We're going to broad jump several times a week. We're going to vertical jump in some capacity. I generally try to lay it out as there's going to be a day a week that we are jumping for, we'll call it like strength, I guess, like a little bit of a slower jump. We're going to do a faster jump with some counter movement, and then we're going to do some sort of a multi-rep jump. So some sort of reactive jump on a given day, depending on the week, or we might do, I've done it where we've done all three on a given day, and then I'll just vary it from week to week, depending on what logistically makes the most sense. I got to a point in Cleburne where we'd have a 5-station circuit. There would be a measured jump, a weighted jump, and then like a reactive jump. It would all three would be on a given day. And I would keep that same setup for the week because then kids just knew what to do and we wouldn't have to re-explain. And that was more of a logistics equation. But I think for here, again, we haven't been jumping like we are going to. And so there's definitely going to be this learning curve and honestly physical adjustment of getting those jumps going. And so I'm probably just going to go, hey, today is just one rep jumps, some weighted stuff, maybe some box jumps, whatever. Okay, another day is more horizontal jumps, and then another day is more multi-rep reactive jumps, and just do it that way at first just to teach them, and create this portfolio of jumps. And then we'll probably eventually go back to like, all right, measured jump, weighted jump, reactive, all on a given day once they've learned all the different jump variations, because then I don't have to explain it every single day. They just know what to do. But no, I still believe in the rotating of jumps, in teaching different phases of jumps, whether it's seated, weighted, different things like that. A reactive, like we'll say broad jump, for example. Okay, we're going to do a seated hand on hip. We're going to do seated with hands. We're going to do standing hand on hip, and then we're going to do standing regular. And you had mentioned this the other day. I'm going to get into weighted broad jumps in some capacity. I don't have chains, so I don't really know quite how I do it. Potentially holding med balls, or else just have a band resistance or something, some sort of weighted broad. And the other idea that Chris Kerr had said this to me is he's doing weighted jumps holding a med ball, but he's doing them single leg. So what he's doing is he's doing one leg jump, two leg land weighted, and doing them that way, which I thought that was a good idea. Just some, a little mix up there. And so, no, I still do believe in just those phases. And what's interesting is then when you start looking at like the broad jumps, those different broad jump variations, a lot of times the seated broad jump with hands is the longest one for most kids because they got more time on the ground, strength driven. Where your twitchy kids, a lot of times, that standing one is going to be their most. But that seated one kind of gets them feeling really good, and it gives them all these variations. And again, they just start improving them a ton. But we haven't done any of those variations. We've done hand on hip standing, but we haven't like measured them per se as much. But we'll get back into that big time once we get in the new space.
Now, do you guys do any hurdle hops?
We will. Yeah, we will. Yeah, when I was in Texas, we were doing almost daily with some sort of hurdle hop, whether it's a short or tall hurdle. If it made sense for the day, we would do it with the ground contact times. If I could set it up that way, we would do it that way. I typically would do the hurdles with ground contact with broad jumps just because logistically I didn't need to measure vertical. I just needed to measure broad. And so we would just do it that way. So yeah, no, we'll do that. We'll do all kinds of hurdles and stuff like that for sure.
And I was kind of leading to this. Have you noticed that if you get a kid stuck on a vertical jump that you can hurdle hop them and kind of break through that ceiling?
I haven't messed with that. No. What are you finding on that?
I find that if you get a kid stuck now, granted, we hurdle hop a lot. So, but before I started hurdle hopping a lot, I tried it. You'd get a few kids stuck on the vertical jump and I'd be like, okay, well, let's try this. I think I'd heard Fahey talk about it, and that's what made me try it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd set up the hurdle hops and I'd get them to go through a couple times, and we would go back to a vertical jump and they would break through that ceiling. I also use the K-box a lot to break through the ceiling, but I don't know what it is about that hurdle hop with good ground contact times that carries over to everything you do.
Are you doing the sub 150 contact?
If I can get them there. Yeah. And so trying to find the right height to get them there. Now anymore, man, we got kids that are going through them so fast we can't hardly get them far enough apart. You get those kids, once they get good at it, they're 1-2s, 1-3s, and you've got 8 foot apart. And it's amazing what that does for all around athleticism.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, I think there's value in it forces everything to just fire so quickly that it's going to carry over to that jump. I mean, and that makes total sense to me of being quick off the ground. I got to project. You're forcing everything to catch up to you to where now when I got time on a counter movement jump, boom, we're going. Where now on the polar opposite end, now I have done a crap ton of marching, I've done a crap ton of the belt marching and gotten PRs regularly at the end of the workout, doing that. But I haven't looked at the hurdle to doing that, but I have done the belt marching quite a bit, and I'm a massive believer in that. I mean, that's something now where we're gonna have 2 belt squats in the new room, so it's not really gonna be that feasible to do a ton. But I'll figure out a way and we'll do it somehow. But I just buy the belt after I bought the belt squat belts, like the nice, we bought them off of Amazon, like the bells of steel, maybe like the padded, not or whatever, belt squat belts with the loading pin. Game over. Like that was it. And so definitely seen the gains in there, and I need to get a hold of some more of those. But we'll see what I can do with the current belt squats we got.
It's one of those deals you look at it and you're like, this stuff's not supposed to work, but it does. I've also noticed with the belt marches, some kids will PR immediately after coming off the marches, and other kids it'll take a minute or so before that potentiates. And I don't know why. I don't know why it works like that with some kids and it doesn't others. There has to be some reason. And I'm sure Fahey'd be like, well, one kid's this and one kid's that. He probably knows the answer, but I haven't determined what that is yet. But some kids, as soon as they come off that thing, boom, they'll pop a big one.
Yeah, I always had the girls rest, or the guys and girls rest a minute, and then we would do it that way, and it worked really well. And we would typically go like 2 rounds, have them go 2 rounds. 3 rounds I found didn't really work. 2 would work, load them up another plate, at least for us and what we were doing, and honestly, I didn't really have much time to go over 3. But, we do 2 rounds and add some weight, and then just it would work. It was actually insane. And the girls would love it. The girls would do it, and they're just like, all right, let's go. And I think to your point of why it works, I think because the majority of kids are slower twitch kids. I think that you're doing something they're going to be better at, working to that capacity and working to that 1 minute, 2 minute work. That's not a twitchy thing. And I think it just goes back to you're working a strength type of thing. And so I think it just going right after that, it's going to get them flowing. And just like if I took a twitchy kid and you did banded squats or whatever prior, they're going to absolutely blow up their jump after the fact.
And that's
same idea.
Yeah, that's where the K box comes in. Some of your really twitchy kids will, a K box will really potentiate that jump.
Yeah, and that's where, like, you talking about the K box is, and I know people might, and there's guys that disagree, where I think there's value in tempos, and we're going to do ISOs, longer ISOs, like 30-second ISOs and shorter ISOs, but we're still going to do like a 10-second eccentric phase. Now, I think there's better value in a fast eccentric, for the record, but I do think you need to touch a slower eccentric, and I don't do it often. It's only, out of a whole year, I might do 4 weeks worth, 6 weeks worth, if that. And I think there's value in it, like you're saying with the K box, because obviously it's pulling you back down with a ton of weight, and I've got to slow it down a ton. Now, it's not technically a slow eccentric per se, but because it's pulling you down so much, you're forcing it to slow down. It kind of becomes a slow eccentric, and that's where I think there's some value in the tempo, and just load it on periodically just to hit that, and guys come out the back end of it feeling probably really good. Now, I think the K box specifically is better for what we're talking about. Taking a kid and doing a 10-second squat is not going to get his freaking jump going, I don't think. But the K box, that's a whole different animal. But to your point, is I still think there's value in that slow tempo, very periodically, not all the time, but just touching it.
I'll watch them do this, and most of the time I don't have it programmed in, but it must work or they wouldn't do it. Kids like I know kids. They're not going to do any extra if they don't think it benefits them.
No,
but
never once.
We bought this cheap, I would call it a wobble board. I don't know what the true name is, but it has a round circle platform, and then underneath it comes to a small base. So when you step on it, if you're off center, it's going to tilt. They'll all step on that one-footed in the center with their heel off of it, and they'll go into an ISO on that wobble board for 30 seconds to a minute, almost like spring ankle. And you'll watch them, and they'll go over there and they'll do that. I won't ever tell them to. They'll just go over there and do that, and they'll come back and they'll hit a jump, and they'll be higher. Kids are so honest that if that wobble board wasn't working, or they didn't think that wobble board was working, they would not go over there and stand on it. So there's something to that. So I just always leave it out for when they're jumping.
I'll have to mess with that. I like that.
Yeah, I think I ain't gonna lie. I think my wife bought it at Aldi's for like $20. She was up there grocery shopping, and it was like
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the middle rack, And she's like, try it and see." And I will say, I think it builds a lot of stiffness in that ankle.
Mm-hmm.
And we all talk about the soleus and the calf and all that. And what I've noticed, and I don't know, the best calf developer I have seen so far has been the K-box.
You're doing it like floating ankle type of deal?
Yep.
That's super smart. Super smart. My buddy Cade in Opelika, they just got a bunch of K boxes and he's been messing with them. So he's been doing good stuff. I'll have to throw that idea out to him.
Where I started getting into it big was my 200 team last year. So I would have them do a split stance.
Didn't they win a state title or something? Weren't they?
The track team won a state title. They got second in state in the 200 team. I would hold them. I mean, the 200's taking 20. I don't know what they were averaging. They were averaging high 21s, I think. So I would hold them in ISO in a split stance. I would hold them in for 10 seconds with their heel off the ground. So they're in a kind of a spring ankle kind of position. I didn't want their heel on the ground. I wanted mid-foot pushing hard through the box. I'd hold them in ISO for 10 seconds, and then I'd let the wheel go and let them run that for 10 seconds. So we're kind of matching the race. I don't know what it is, but I saw more calf development when we were going through that than I've probably seen on any other lift we've done.
See, and it's funny you say that because it's when you talk about calf development, I think that there's naturally you gotta there's value in like doing longer duration like pogo jumps and things of that nature, but also agree or disagree, everyone, but like doing tempo runs, like little things like doing a tempo run fires up the guy's calves, doing sled marches, that type of stuff. Like the extensive stuff really hammers those calves a ton. And it's very surprising how much, and doing the belt marches, it's very surprising how much that stuff it really is hard on the kids of like, we do belt marches. Where'd you feel that the most? In my feet, in my calves, hips, but a lot of times it's like, what was by far the worst part? My calves and feet, that. And I think that's the part of the belt marches that probably help the most is really just getting your calf going. It's getting your calves and feet going. Everything in your hips are already fired up. Now I'm just loading up calves and feet a ton. And now those are getting involved. And I think that's like you're saying, you can put that stuff there and all of a sudden now it's connecting hip to feet. And now we're talking about some true good development.
And that's what I would say about the K-box is you can get them in that 90-degree position in a split stance. Now you're working through the soleus up to the gastroc. So you're catching both. Where if you're not careful, you're either catching one or the other. You're either doing a seated calf raise trying to catch the soleus, or everything you do upright is in the gastroc. So I think, and there's other exercises, you can do a split stance half field. You can do all that stuff and hit that whole range of motion. But whatever it is with that eccentric stop and that eccentric coming out of the eccentric and that push through on that K-box to get in the concentric, I mean, they'll come off that thing and they'll have veins in their calves popping. And I mean, they look like bodybuilders when they come off that. And there's very few exercises or machines that are multi-function the way I think that is.
No, the K-box is its own animal. There's not even anything close to it. And since you were talking about it, something I was thinking about, since I was talking about like the squats, and I have not done this. This is just an idea. Is I wonder if there's some value in throwing a band on a squat and hitting an eccentric tempo with it. Doing a heavy band because it's forcing you down, just like a K-box is going to do. Just a thought of I just wonder if there's maybe some value in that of taking that slow down with a band, if that maybe can get you some good stuff out of that. Again, I haven't done that. That's just something I just thought about.
I would say it'll make them sore.
Heck yeah.
You'll definitely get that. Where I see the K-box is, it's pulling you down, but when they get good at it, it's not pulling them down. They're ahead of it.
Yeah.
Where they're getting the benefit is the stop.
That was very well worded. They're ahead of it. Yes.
Your slow kids, it'll pull you down. But once they get the timing down, they're ahead of that pull. Now, the stop at the bottom, it'll pull them right through that hole.
Yep.
That's where the eccentric to concentric is where the growth happens on that box.
Yeah, and I think that's where like I'm always going to do periodically ISOs in some capacity. Like I said, I'm going to touch eccentric tempo, right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm going to do it, but I'm going to hit some sort of longer isometric more regularly than I am. Like when we come back, we're going to do 30-second ISOs, and we did that actually after Thanksgiving, and guys made really good gains, and that's really all we did was that. And there's two ways to develop strength: it's eccentric and isometric. Concentric is just an expression, and so for me, I think especially on the high school kids, man, those isometrics are going to be money, and we're going to surf both ends of we're going to do those long ones eccentric for 2 weeks in the middle, but then we're going to go 6-second ISOs at the end to really hammer heavier pauses where 30 seconds, we're just building capacity.
What I like about the ISOs is, especially a kid that may not be totally comfortable in the weight room yet, their form's a little off.
Mm-hmm.
You can put them in different isometric positions and they're going to find the most leverage if you give them enough time, especially like in deadlift, where you're only going to bend over so far pulling that. Eventually, you're going to sit back in it because you have to. Squats the same way. I think they have a lot of merit. I think also when you come off that, and Josh Bryant kind of talked about that some, if you know you got a kid getting ready to go for a big PR, if you put them in a position where they have to ISO that position first, and they'll most of the time they'll blow it out of the water. I don't know what all that potentiates and how that makes that feel that much different, but I can assure you it works.
Yeah, and what I like about it is that coming off a break, they really don't get sore. When they're doing those even though it's a long ISO and we're loading it up as heavy as they can handle, they really don't get super super sore from that. And we're still gonna, we're gonna do this. The ISO for us will replace our dynamic effort day for the first 6 weeks. Like those tempos will replace our dynamic effort day, and then we're still going to do max effort stuff the other days because you still got to hit the regular lifting, I believe, during that time. And then once we come off of that, we'll then hit another 6 weeks, but that's when we go back to now dynamic effort and max effort. And I think, Lord willing, we're going to have some good gains from it, but we'll find out.
I know we talk a lot about all this stuff, and it seems like what you're doing must be working because your kids are bought in, and every week it's this many percent hit PRs and this many percent hit PRs. So it's amazing how that drives the room. You get to a point where the kids that aren't putting in effort start putting in effort because they don't want to be the ones that aren't PRing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, when you start talking about team averages, that's team averages in high school, I think can be very hard because you got some kids that try and you got some kids that don't, and those team averages kind of can get bogged down. And so like when you look at our bench team average of our current guys, this is not including seniors that have left because a lot of those guys had some big benches, is the current group has gone from a 215 bench in July to 235 as a team, and there's plenty of guys in there that have been messing around and not doing what they need to do. And so, you've had some pretty big gains, but like you said, it goes back to, man, you're just channeling what every high school male wants to do, and they want to see what they can do, and they want to know where they're at. And it's amazing how many guys know what their max is, immediately. If you're just like, if they're like, hey, I think the sheet is wrong or whatever, if they want to say that one day, I'm like, okay, well, what's your max? And they'll say a certain number. I'm like, well, I've got it 50 pounds different. So either you're wrong or you didn't write it down or whatever it might be. And that's where, you come into that. But no, I think it's super important in our environment to take advantage of that. And because it's such a potent time in their life, man, that they can totally transform as a kid, as long as we're kind of chasing certain things and chasing the right things at that.
It's amazing. I'll get new kids in and we'll kind of start wrapping this thing up, but I'll get new kids in that don't quite understand the system. And so, okay, well, what's your lift on this? What'd you hit? I don't know. How do you not know? How do you not know? And then there'll be a group of kids in the room, and I'll be like, okay, what's your cambered bar 16-inch box squat? And they'll rattle off a number. What's yours? They'll rattle off a number. It's like 7 guys in here know to the pound what they can lift. You just did this last week. How do you not know? And then slowly you bring them on board where they know they're going to get asked, and they learn pretty quick. So some kids it's really important to. Some kids could care less. And somehow you have to coach them both.
Well, and they get and what's always, and this, I was talking to a kid about this the other week. When you start getting to those big PR numbers, 225, 275, 350, those big numbers is, we'll be in training one day and a kid might hit they hit a new max and they'll be like, well, I got more. I'm like, you don't. I'm telling you right now, you hit this big, massive milestone, 225 bench. It blew up. I've got it. I'm like, I said, if we put 5 pounds on there, I'm guaranteed you're not going to get it, or you're going to really struggle. Just leave it. It doesn't matter. They're like, well, I got it. And of course you'll put stuff on there and they don't get it or whatever. And getting them to learn just that psychological, if it was you smoke 235, great, we'll go to 245. But it's that daggone, those big milestone numbers, man. It's psychologically, those kids get so built up for it. They hit it, call it. Just go to that next thing.
It takes a little while to get them on board, but once they understand a 5-pound PR is just fine, a 10-pound PR is just fine. When you start when you start chasing 25 because this felt good, well, now if you miss, you don't have anything.
Correct.
At least if you hit it, you have a PR. So
yep.
I've got kids now, they will go over, because we do switch lifts, they will go over and look at their book just to make sure, and they'll be like, okay, the last time on this lift I hit a 275. Where right now we're at 245. So now they're starting to think about chasing a PR. So, well, I'm not going to go 300, but let's go 285. Let's go 280. Then they'll hit that, and then they're happy. So then at least when they walk away at the end of the day, they gained. But, those kids will chase too big of numbers too fast. They don't realize how, especially in certain lifts, that weight magnifies, like an incline. That weight magnifies whatever the multiplier is on the bench, and they don't get that through their head. So it's like, you're going to have to chase a little less here, or a low box. Chase a little less. A high box, yeah, maybe we can go for it. But a low box, it's not going to feel like you think it is.
Well, and the part with that's always fun with our guys is, like you're saying, on the bench and stuff, is like, I'm telling you right now, dude, put on 2.5s. Like, they might not, I don't even know if they use 2.5s. I say that jokingly. I don't know that they ever used 2.5s prior. I'm just put 2.5s on, man. That's all you need. That's all you got to do. And it's like that happened the other week. One of our guys hit an all-time PR at 340, I think, on bench. And he had come in, or 340, whatever it was. And he had come in and was like, I'm going to hit this today. I'm going to hit 340 or 345. It was one of those two. And he had barely gotten 330 or 335. It wasn't great. And he's like, all right. He said, I'm going 340, 345. I said, okay. Because he didn't even hesitate. He's like, I'm going. I was like, all right. Goes up, best bench of his whole day. You know what I mean? Because mentally he was just with it, and getting the guys to, like you said, hey, I just need 5 or 10 pounds. And then I always had to tell them, like, guys, if we just go up 5 or 10 pounds every month, that's 50 to 100 pounds a year. If you put 50 pounds on your bench, I'll be pretty happy with that for the stronger guys, and bringing those numbers up. But there's definitely value in it. And I used to not be such a big believer on it, but now I really am now, with just the high school kids, and letting them go when we want to go, and let them do that more often, and versus what I used to do, for sure.
So there's a couple things in there I've noticed. Your more elite kids will use more 2.5 plates than your non-elite kids.
Yes.
Because they understand the importance. They've been in the room long enough to realize that those 2.5 plates matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing, like you said, 10 pounds a month or whatever the case may be is growth. But what I've also come to realize is another rep is worth quite a bit too. So if you have a kid hit 275 for one on whatever the lift is, and then let's say in 6 weeks he hits 275 for 2, that's a pretty big accomplishment. Granted, it only comes out to 10 to 15 pounds on a max, but still, they just hit their max for a double, that's
Mm-hmm.
a huge driver.
Yeah, and the guys know like their triples and stuff like that. Like it's definitely undervalued. I think that extra rep is definitely undervalued versus the weight. And I think that stems back into what we're talking about of 5-3-1 versus a rep max. If that like what we're doing now of, if the last week on their 5+, last time we did 5+, they got 12 of a certain weight, and then the next week they got 13. That really doesn't mean much to them versus I did 275 for 8 last time. Now I did 285 or 280. They're like, all right, they're more amped about that than they are the extra rep. And that's where there's value in that. But like we've talked about this before of I do think if you're talking about rep maxes, if you take the same percentages and max those over time, like if I just take my 60% and I hit max reps on that and you track that, I think there's probably more value mentally for a kid in that. We will value the single rep of something, but if you tell this kid, hey, here's your 60%, and at the end of the day you were tired and you did 8 this first week, and the next cycle you did 15, your capacity is getting better, and you just keep looking at that number. I think there's probably a lot of value in that of a set percentage, and it means more to the kid. I feel like when you talk about high school kids.
I agree to a certain extent. I don't think anything will mean more to a kid than his first 225 bench, his first 315 squat, and his first 400 pull. And then, yeah, as they go up, yes.
Oh, yeah.
The 315 bench matters. Don't get me wrong, but they're all in a race to get the 2 wheels. They're all, So, yes, I agree with what you're saying there, but also I think we forget how much those big milestones mean to those kids.
Facts. Yeah, especially like in our room at this point, 405 deadlift is the thing. That's the, it was like, oh my God, this kid did 315. He pulled 315 on a sumo. And meanwhile, I'm just like, yeah, that's what like at this point, like 315 is average. Like that's not, I'd have to look, but it's something close to the average. It might be 335, but now it's like 405 is the number to achieve and look for of like, okay, now we're starting to get pretty decently strong in this deadlift and bench, same way, obviously 2 plates. And like you said, 315 squat is still that number, man. That's still the number. Once you get them to those, you got them, once they, you check all those boxes mentally, you got them. And then you get all the different sprints going, man. Cause we've only done, I've only timed 140 here. We randomly did it on a bye week just for something different for the kids and just to get them. And, the kids they had a good time with it, but we'll get back to that now in our new space. We're right across from the football field where the old space, if you walk down there, it's at least a 5-minute walk. Like I know that doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you talk about class and time, okay, I got to worry about 10-minute transition time and doing all this, where now in the new room, I'm 50 yards from the football field. We can go out there and I can sprint outside. I can sprint inside if I wanted to. Like, so there's going to be so many things opened up that the guys are not quite ready for. And I'm taking over. I'm going to start working with baseball, and I started working with softball the past couple of weeks. And so we'll all get to going and start rolling. It's going to be a very different setup going forward. It's going to be very exciting.
I think sometimes we mature too much and we forget how simple the high school male mind is. Girls are a little different. They think a little bit different, but I think sometimes we just outsmart ourselves too much.
Well, if you just it's like I said earlier, man, they're gonna go do it anyway. They're gonna go max out in some capacity, man. It just scratch that itch periodically, let them do it, and then you're gonna be okay. And it's just the holding them back piece. Again, I used to definitely do that for sure. Now not so much, but I think too, though, I think the biggest change in that, though, for me has been from how many athletes I'm working with and the level that we're playing at. Like when you're dealing with smaller level athletics and smaller schools and smaller whatever, if you just got three good athletes, you're going to be just fine. At that level. Like if you got three studs, it doesn't matter whether they lift or not. Like you're going to have a pretty good team. And when you start talking about upper level 5, 6A, your top two levels at a state, now we're like, you got to really develop your kids. You got to really maximize what you got, because some of these other schools, man, they got 22 studs, and you might have 5 studs, and you're trying to keep up with these teams. You've got to really push, and you've got to really, the strength matters, the speed matters. Like it's I think and this might be a hot take, I think when you're talking about smaller division athletics as a whole, that is where speed becomes a much more important factor. It has more weight, because you don't have as many high level athletes. And so if I can get my average kid to be that much faster, all of a sudden I look like a stud compared to these other very average athletes at my small division school. And I think that's where you see that sometimes in smaller schools of like, we're going to hammer speed, and we care about speed too. But we're on a football field, and there's some guys that are 5'8", 130 pounds, and then there's some 6'5", 300-pound kids. So like speed no longer is important or as important. Instead, I've got to get some guys strong. Like we got to keep up with it, and you got to do all of it. But I think, man, that's the thing that I've definitely, going back to my point of going back to, it's important to track strength and push those things, because now you're just dealing with such a different level of athlete, and a wider spread of type of athlete you run into, that you've got to push all those factors versus just one thing. You've got to push everything, and you got to develop them, and ultimately too, the fastest I've ever gotten kids is by getting their deadlift up. So there's that.
I was thinking about it. I'll add on to your hot take. I know I said I was wrapping this up, and I really am. But college is now driving high school. So if you have a really good, let's take Georgia, for example, because Georgia seems to be one of the hotbeds right now. I know Texas is too. But those kids will come from all over the nation to go to a top high school in Georgia. So once you develop your credibility, your talent starts coming in. If you're just a small school, nobody's dying to move to Adrian, Missouri, where we are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But now maybe one of the Lee Summits or somewhere up there where the exposure is, they got kids moving in all the time. So the development, while I do think it is important at your upper high schools, if they're good, those kids seem to show up.
Yes. And so I think, to your point on that, is the most important thing, I think, for a public high school, and for anywhere, you're going to deal with private schools, you're going to deal with all that stuff, is private schools, you're dealing, as somebody that's worked at private schools, you're not dealing with the same athletes across the board, right? And there's such a discrepancy between the upper level and the lower level of private school, because you can get some very, very good teams at the upper level, but you also have some really daggone bad teams. In public school, there's not nearly the variability top to bottom. And to your point about kids moving in, is that, parents or whoever, they might see a private school and they're like, oh, look, well, they're winning. They've had winning seasons. It's like, okay, well, they're not playing anybody good. And then you kind of start getting into, we'll just say football, for an example, of, recruiting wise, of this kid went to a private school, and a parent might be frustrated of like, well, they're not really getting looked at. Well, coaches know what level of ball you're playing. Are you playing against kids that are good? You got 2,000 yards rushing. You got, not 2,000, but let's say you got 1,500 yards rushing. Okay, well, who'd you play? Did you play anybody good? You're on tape or whatever? I don't know. And so my point of this story was going to be that I think it's so important for public schools to the mission is like to keep your kids at your school, your good athletes in your area, to make sure they're still coming to your school. And that's unfortunately just how it is everywhere, in that once you're winning on field, all of a sudden, like you said, kids show up. It's just magically kids show up at your school. Parents move, whatever you want to say. Kids are showing up at your school because you're winning on field. but that requires development. Like you said, it requires everybody off field to be on the same page. It's not just accumulate kids and think you're going to win. You've still got to daggone develop them. But unfortunately, the first thing that has to happen is that development. You have to develop the guys that you got, and it's super important to do. I mean, we've got guys that are good. I mean, we've got legit Division I kids, group Power 4 kids, and we've got to develop them. And ultimately, we got to try to keep the kids at our school in our county. But yeah, magically, if you went off field, all of a sudden it's just a snowball effect of kids show up. But you still have to show development initially, and then it gets easier over time, no doubt. No doubt, no doubt. Right or wrong, it's just, but you still have to develop and you still got to coach.
It's the flywheel effect. You got to get that thing moving. Once it's moving, it'll kind of take care of itself, but you got to get it moving.
Well, we've had guys, man. We've had like one of our kids just committed to South Carolina, and we've got another receiver that I think could very easily be an SEC level kid. He's already got some ACC offers. Like, he's going to be legit. He's a great kid. He works. We got several of those, but you got to develop it. And, we've got momentum going. And I think too, the other part that you fight at high school is expectations from your community and expectations from administration and everybody else around, good or bad. Because if you've been anywhere, just generally speaking, like if you've been in a place that typically loses and does well or doesn't do well, that's so hard to break. That's so hard to break the mentality of that and the expectations of, like, parents are just glad that you went 500. Like, I'm not trying to go 500. Like, I'm trying to daggone win. I think that's probably the hardest part about high school, is to get your kids believing in what you're doing and going against what everybody else is doing and their expectations of you. And that, oh, you made playoffs. Great job. That's a great year. No, I'm trying to go 3, 4, 5, 6 round. Like, we're trying to go, it's not just make a first round playoff game. Let's win and be successful. And you do that, all of a sudden your program, kids start showing up because you start winning. Anyway, that's my rant. There's a rant for the day for you.
Well, I tell you what, we're kind of mountain people. On our vacation, we usually go out west, but I know my wife's hitting me up to go to the beach. So I'm hoping in the near future I can get out and see your guys get their summer work in, hit Tybee Island, see Savannah. Come on. I think it'll be a good time.
Man, Savannah's nice, man. I've really liked Savannah. It's been a good change. Like you said at the beginning, we just moved. Was not planning on moving and leaving Texas. That's one of the best jobs I ever had. Loved it over at Cleburne. It's just kind of a perfect storm of great coach, this new facility, and this situation, and within driving distance of home. Hard to beat. And Savannah's been nice. We've really liked it here, and all the family and what Caitlin's doing is really good, and what our daughter's doing. So, but no, man, it's a good place to visit, good place to stay. We really like Tybee a lot. And then you're right up the street from Hilton Head. You're like 45 minutes to Hilton Head and stuff. So all good driving distance things from here. So it's been a good adjustment for us. And the selling point of a 10,000 square foot weight room was also an easy sell for me with windows. Most importantly, we got windows everywhere. So I've never had a weight room with windows. So that's going to be a big deal for me.
I got to go out to Weber State this summer, and it was amazing. They've got all their windows, and you look out, and the mountains are right there, and you're working out with the mountains. Like I said, I'm a mountain guy, but no, I want to get down there, see you guys work out to hit a couple workouts and let the wife enjoy the beach. And I've never been that far southeast, and something I've always wanted to see.
You just got to prepare for the humidity.
I'm from Missouri, man. I can handle it.
At least the air is moving down here.
Yeah, the ocean right there, you get a little bit of a breeze. So, but anyways, man, I appreciate you taking all this time. We probably went longer than what you had planned, but I definitely enjoyed it.
Oh man, it's always good to catch up and definitely spitball back and forth. Hey, it's just another day here of rambling on about something.
Well, I hope you have the good rest of your day. Catch up on some college football, and we'll see what the new year brings.
All right, brother. Appreciate you.